Tikograd. Tickorrad, the capital of Tikonov, is also the largest, most heavily industrialized city on the planet. With the Confederation's largest battlemech manufacturer also within its confines, it was the most obvious target on the world, which is why it was defended by the best battle group, commanded by Colonel Ridziks himself. The city had long been divided into three areas: administrative, industrial, and residential, each being separated from the others by its own walls and towers, with only a limited number of roads and subways connecting the three sections. Surrounding this entire complex was another series of walls and towers, though not quite as imposing as the inner ones. The Capellan plan was for the armoured and mechanized infantry regiments of the battle group to man the outer walls and defend the parklands between the fortified city sections. Infantry regiments would defend the buildings and the factories of the city, and the battlemech units defending the city were the 1st Battalion of Hamilton's Highlanders, an elite unit famed for its ability to win despite the odds, and a company of Colonel Ridziks' own personal regiment, Stapleton's Iron Hand. Their orders were to reinforce the tanks and act as mobile reserve during the coming siege. The 6th Crucis Lancers RCT would drop 100 kilometers to the south of Tikograd and spent the first week slowly moving toward the city, carefully avoiding the sabotage and terrorist efforts of the local militia. The commander of the 6th Lancers, Marshal Orville Gossage, was content to secure the southern approaches to the city and wait for help. On the 3rd of October, the 8th Crucis Lancers RCT arrived north of the city. On the 5th of October, artillery units of the two Lancer RCTs would begin a day-long barrage, aimed at key weapons bunkers along the northern and southern sections of the outer wall. Davian fighters were assigned to wipe out the Capellan fighter wing stationed within the city's wall and to harass enemy units with bomb and strafing runs. The bombardment would pay off with the collapse of several weapons towers and walls. Columns of lancers would then move toward the breach under the cover of darkness. When tanks, APCs and mechs began exploding as they neared the wall, it became obvious that Colonel Ridziks had heavily mined the northern and southern approaches to the city. Now facing a disaster, Marshal Gossage and Marshal Neil Wargo of the 8th Lancers ordered their troops to withdraw. Both marshals would later receive a great deal of criticism for not suspecting a minefield had been laid, and though the ground outside the city walls didn't look disturbed because the mines had been laid long before, the threat of a minefield should have been the uppermost thing in their minds because one of the companies that they were attempting to secure was the Kirov Explosive Device Company, renowned for their brand of Vibrabomb. The next 3 days, then, were spent clearing these minefields with concussion shells and bombs that explode just above the minefield, creating a pressure wave, detonating most of the mines. During this time, units of both the Lancer RCTs would complete their circle around the city. The next assault, then, would occur on the 8th of October. Mechs and tanks again moved toward the wall, while fighters overhead strafed the enemy positions. Colonel Ridziks, in his bright blue Orion battlemech, led a company of Highlanders against the 8th Lancers as they reached the walls. The Highlanders gave out more punishment than they received, as one warrior, Sub-Commander Alexei Dothan, performed so skillfully in his stalker mech that he single-handedly stopped an assault lance of Davian mechs by downing 2 and damaging 2 others before being killed himself. Despite this spirited defence, both of the Lancer RCTs would establish footholds inside the walls of Tikograd. For the next 3 days, AFFS forces tried to exploit their gains. Their advances were small and very costly, with Colonel Ridziks and his company of mechs seeming to be everywhere at once, providing help wherever it looked as if the Lancers were about to make a breakthrough. Intelligence agents had warned the AFFS officers that Colonel Ridziks might destroy the city's military industries if Davian forces would breach the defences of the industrial section. It would be an empty victory for the Federated Suns to take Tikonov but lose the 20 weapons factories, including the large earthworks battlemech factory. Something had to be done to protect these vital industries. The Marshal's plan was risky, but had promise. Poor performance, coordination and execution of all phases almost ruined everything. On the morning of the 11th of October, the 6th and 8th Lancer RCTs made major thrusts for the residential and administrative sections of the city. Also that morning, Lancer aerospace fighters would strike Capellan communications and deep space radar installations. This sudden shift in targets raised Ridziks' suspicion. As a precaution, he ordered his company of Iron Hands and the 3 companies of Highlanders into the industrial section of the city. This shocked the Highlanders, who didn't feel comfortable abandoning the other two sections to the enemy. They obeyed, and nervously held back as the Lancers breached and then entered the administrative and residential sections of the city. The Colonel's suspicions had been correct. On his dropship, which waited just outside the mech factory, a deep space radar detected incoming dropships. Colonel Ridziks then issued hurried orders to the Highlanders to prepare for enemy mechs dropping inside the industrial section. The Mech Regiment, Armoured Regiment and Mechanised Infantry Regiment from the elite 7th Crucis Lancers RCT had boarded their dropships outside the conquered city of Bulan and were descending to make a drop directly on the industrial sector. They didn't know that the 6th and 8th Lancers had already begun their portion of the attack 2 hours too early, tipping off Ridziks. Just as Colonel Ridziks was about to order his troops to begin destroying the factories, the first mechs of the 7th Lancers hit their drop zones. The 6th and 8th Lancers, realising that the timing was off and that the diversion hadn't worked, turned from the other sections of the city to protect the 7th from the Hamilton Highlander group. The drop of the 7th Lancers was going badly. The whole mech regiment was supposed to land near the earthworks factory in the southeastern corner of the industrial section, but Lao fighters and poor atmospheric conditions scattered them. Only Bravo Company, 1st Battalion of the 7th, dropped in and around the mech factory, right in the middle of the 1st Company of Hamilton Highlanders. Some of the lighter mechs landed on the large flat roof of the main assembly building, where they would take advantage of their elevation to harass Highlanders on the ground. The heavier Davian mechs fought past the Highlanders outside the building, entering the building itself. Davian Captain Rebecca Sellers activated the mechanism that closed the factory's doors and prayed that she could hold out. Marshal Gossage, realising that the battle plans were now useless, ordered his mech regiments and armoured regiments to attack the walls of the industrial section, and as he did this, the scattered 7th Lancers were desperately trying to regroup and reach the mech factory. Inside the factory, Bravo Company were barely hanging on against Highlander mechs, which had now blown the doors off. Captain Sellers and her mechs were using the cover of the huge machinery and fighting to prevent the Highlanders from entering the building. Highlanders and jump-capable mechs had leapt onto the roof and were now fighting the Lancers in a forest of air conditioners and exhaust stacks. The mechs and tanks of the 6th Crucis Lancers had breached the wall around the industrial section of the Tickorrad area 90 minutes after the operation began. Racing toward the mech factory, they were ambushed by a company of Highlanders that had been hiding behind a warehouse, and despite heavy fire from the Capellans, the 6th Lancers would push on. Captain Sellers and her company were just about at an end. Most of her remaining mechs were severely damaged. The few that could move without risking an overheat explosion were out of ammo for their mass weapons. They had inflicted equally heavy casualties on the Highlanders and had kept them out of the factory, and when the 6th Lancers did arrive with a flourish of explosion and scattering of Highlanders, they found Captain Sellers' Thunderbolt missing its left arm and its heatsinks literally glowing. The Highlanders, greatly outnumbered by this point by an enemy that seemed to be everywhere, attempted to withdraw through the northern gate of the industrial section. As they approached the gate, a battalion of mechs and heavy tanks from the 7th Lancers would catch up with them. The ensuing fight provided enough time for a tank regiment from the 6th Lancers to array itself outside the northern entrance. As a Highlander attempted to retreat from the Davian mechs through the gates, it became the target of the Davian Manticores and Patton tanks. Very few Highlanders lived long enough to surrender. Colonel Ridziks, at this point, realising that his life and the lives of his mech company were now in danger, fought through a company of 6th Lancer mechs and onto his dropship, which immediately lifted off. Seeing an objective of the invasion slipping through their fingers, the marshals of all 3 RCTs ordered all fighters to pursue. The weather, which was stormy and windy, favoured the Capellan dropship, and there were moments when the Davian fighters swarmed over his ship. It slipped into and out of the clouds and lost its pursuers. The dropship left Tikonov to rendezvous with a scout-class jumpship that had been hiding near a pirate jump point, and soon the commander of the Capella military was light years away from Tikonov in the Elgin system, for the moment safe from the armed forces of the Federated Suns. With the departure of Colonel Ridziks, organised resistance on Tikonov soon broke down. On the 14th of October, the Provisional City Administration of Tickorrad surrendered without condition. An assessment of the city's wealth revealed that only 2 military factories had been destroyed, and most importantly, the Earthworks Battlemech factory, though heavily damaged in the fighting, was repairable. Other actions on Tikonov. Though Tickorrad was the heart of Tikonov and the scene of some of the bloodiest action, 5 other Lancer RCTs were involved in heavy fighting on the planet. The first Crucis Lancers were ordered to seize the city of Karaganda, which sits astride an isthmus connecting the continents of Kazan and Psychov. It served as a major trade centre and had an important scientific research station. Defending the city was the 2nd Ariana Fusilier Mech Regiment and its battle group. The 2nd Ariana Fusiliers apparently disobeyed orders from Colonel Ridziks by attacking the 1st Lancers as they were attempting to surround the city. This unexpected attack staggered the Lancers, with heavy losses amongst their infantry and tank regiments. For a week then, it was uncertain who had the advantage, but by the 10th of October, the 1st Lancers had broken through the Fusiliers' lines and entered the city. The 2 surviving battalions of the Fusiliers would retreat from Tikonov. The 2nd Crucis Lancers were the weakest of the 8 RCTs, with many inexperienced units. The 2nd were ordered to take Gizka, a mining town high in a mountain range that was defended by a single battalion of the Ariana Grenadiers and its battle group. Heavy fighter attack had helped to soften the enemy and gave the RCT's commander time to plan strategy carefully. In the assault, on the 9th of October, the Green troops fought like veterans, overwhelming the Ariana Grenadiers and taking the city just 2 weeks later. The 3rd Crucis Lancers captured New Moscow, a northern port city on the continent of Ufa, from the 1st Chesterton Voltigeurs and its battle group. The climax of this battle was a massive assault on the city's port area by a regiment of hover tanks and a regiment of infantry mounted in hovercraft. The 4th Crucis Lancers were assigned to seize the southern city of Ulan from the 2nd Chesterton Voltigeurs. Ulan sat on the edge of a vast jungle and was a centre for trade in such things as animal pelts, wood, and food. The 2nd Chesterton also apparently disobeyed orders, meeting the Lancers outside the city. The Lancers, however, delighted in the variety of terrains, with forests, plains, hills, and mountains, and in 3 weeks, through superior manoeuvring and tactics, the 4th Crucis Lancers captured the city, crushed the 2nd and 3rd battalions of the Voltigeurs in the process of doing so. The 5th Crucis Lancers were assigned to attack Selenograd on the southern edge of the Great Ufa Desert. Unique in their lack of a mech regiment, the 5th Crucis Lancers were thought to be the least likely to achieve their objective. Despite this pessimism, the 5th Lancers were twice as many tank regiments in their group, defeated the 3rd Chesterton Voltigeurs, defending the city. And then with the surrender of Ulan by the 18th of October, all of the major cities on Tikonov were under the control of the Crucis Lancers. Tikonov was a prize of the Federated Suns, though enemy activity required an additional month and 20 more regiments of occupation troops to finally subdue it. Other second wave action. The AFFS would attack 8 worlds beside Tikonov during the second wave. Invading Davian forces found the going quite easy on some worlds. The 1st Davian Guards RCT easily defeated the militia of Sitsang. The 33rd Avalon Hussars and the Blue Star Regulars found similar easygoing in seizing the agricultural world of Genoa. The militia of Gansing would put up a slightly better fight but were eventually smashed by the vastly superior forces of the Screaming Eagles mercenary regiments. Assisted by their 4th Garrison Force with 6 regiments of Davian occupation troops, and on the planet of Buklau, the Gamma and Delta regiments of the 12th Vegan Rangers, along with the 1st Garrison Force, crushed the militia. Other Davian invasion troops had a tougher going. The Aragon Borderers, reinforced by Delta Company of the Davian Light Guards Mech Regiment, were sent to take Hunan from the 1st Battalion of Fremont's Cuirassiers. Outside the capital city of the planet's northern pole, the marauders of the Cuirassiers waded into the Borderers with devastating effect. Only the timely intervention of the double-strength Delta Company, which had circled and fallen on the Cuirassiers from the rear, saved the day, and the Borderers. Captain Redburn and Delta Company would further elevate their fame during this final battle, which pitted them against Omega Company, the Cuirassiers' command company, made up entirely of marauder battlemechs. The 4th Deneb Light Cavalry RCT, commanded by Marshal Vernon Fredericks, was assigned to take the pastoral world of Zurich. Defending Zurich was the 1st Battalion of Tremaldi's Secutors, commanded in a quirk of fate by Major Vanessa Fredericks, the disinherited daughter of the Davian commander. The fighting would take place on the planet's southern continent and ended when the much larger RCT crushed all but one company of the Guards. Major Vanessa Fredericks was one of the few LoreWarriors who escaped. The compelling world of Ningpo was the responsibility of the 3rd Davian Guards RCT. The choice of drop zones and superior Davian fighter cover allowed the Guards to split the 1st Battalion of McCrimmon's Light Cavalry away from Marion's Highlanders. The Light Cavalry, pushed now into a mountain range, had nowhere to retreat, and was eventually destroyed. Marion's Highlanders, members of the elite Scottish Northwind Highlanders, fighting as a clan who had recently arrived on Ningpo from Elgin, were much tougher opponents. A regiment of individualists, the Highlanders commanded by the famous Colonel Alistair von Marion, used innovation, courage, and sometimes sheer stupidity to sting the slowly advancing regiments of the 3rd Davian Guard. After 2 months, the Highlanders were now confined to the Yolosha Peninsula, with little hope of breaking out or being able to escape the planet. Marshal Herbert Hobart, instead of administering the coup de grace, would offer the Highlanders a truce, which they would gratefully accept. This move actually proved omniscient, because a day after Marshal Hobart had given the order, he received an urgent communique to refrain from harming the Highlanders any more than was absolutely necessary. Unknown to the Marshal and to Colonel Marion, Davian emissaries were conducting negotiations with the clan elders. On the world of Alicia, the 1st Regiment of New Iverson Chasseurs proved their abilities again by crushing the 2nd Battalion of Hamilton's Highlanders, not a member of the Northwind clan, and the 2nd Battalion of MacGregor's Armoured Scouts. The victory for the Chasseurs was short-lived, however, as a death commando squad slipped through the picket lines of the Chasseurs, severely wounding Marshal Nicholas Stevenson and his command staff. Colonel Ophelia Stevenson assumed command of the elite mech regiment, while her father was returned to the Federated Suns for treatment. Overview of the second wave. Any hopes that the AWFS had that the second wave of assaults would be as successful and easy as the first were disappointed. Capellan troops were better prepared, and Capellan mech regiments were much more organised and often more fanatical. Planetary militias were no match for Davian forces, but did perform to the best of their abilities. Some Davian troops, particularly the 6th and 8th Crucis Lancers and their aborted first assault on Tikograd, had made some extremely questionable decisions. Bad judgment and high casualties worried some marshals, who now believed that the troops were beginning to tire. Despite this, the second wave of Operation Rat was judged to be a success. The invasions accomplished all of their objectives except one: Colonel Pavel Ridziks and his escape from the grasp of the 3 regimental combat teams of Crucis Lancers. This was considered an embarrassing loss for the AWFS, and the capture of Tikonov, with all of its industries intact, and the capture of any other resource-rich worlds would offset the casualties and the now questionable performance of some units. Prince Hansa would give the go-ahead, though, for Wave 3.